I'm Caitlin Dwyer, so I teach in the theology department here at Thomas More. This three-part series on the history and mission of our university. Sister Fidelis, longtime member of the theology department, Sister of Divine Providence, will share with you more about her order and its connection to the unique history of the founding of our college.
I know, of course, a lot about my own community's connection with the founding of the college, but I decided I needed to get some dates straight. So I began to look some things up. And as I was looking up stuff that I would need to share here, I began to realize that the founding of the college was almost like what you would call a perfect storm. There were so many historical pieces, some of them going back a ways, but so many historical pieces that came together in a way that it was almost inevitable that we would have the college. So I'm going to give some historical background about a number of different circumstances that led up to the founding of the college. So first of all, there is the history of the Diocese of Covington. So the diocese itself was only established in 1853, and at that time it was a very large geographical area. More than half of the geography of the state of Kentucky was a part of the Diocese of Covington. And there were, I'll talk more about the distinct areas, but that's one piece, the history of the diocese all the way back from the beginning. And then another piece of that is that this diocese really, there were some ethnic considerations, especially in the northern part of the diocese, which was primarily German and Irish, and I might say even primarily German. I've heard the northern Kentucky or the greater Cincinnati area referred to as the German Catholic ghetto. So, so we have that as part of what happens in terms of our establishing of the college. So the other piece was that in the early history of the diocese, the very first three bishops that served in the diocese were very much concerned about Catholic education. And I'm going to point out, actually, when we come to it, that the second bishop, Bishop Tepe, insisted that every parish in the diocese have a Catholic school connected to it. Now, I'm talking about over half the state. You understand that's a lot of territory, and that's a need for a lot of teachers to staff these schools. So that's a piece of the perfect storm. And then there was the situation in Europe, which was going on around the time, well, before the establishment of the college, but a situation in Europe that required almost that religious communities leave, that they find new places, because they were threatened with extinction. And so there was this influx early on, more like the from 1850 to 1890, the influx of religious communities to this area in an attempt to escape the culture conflict, actually. So, so we have now a great need for teachers for Catholic schools, and we have an influx of religious, it's affordable education. I don't want to say cheap, but cheap education in the form of religious sisters. So we had this as part of the perfect storm. And then there was another issue, I think, that contributes to the fact that there has to be a Catholic college established, is that women were not welcomed into most universities in this country at this time. For women to receive an education, for the most part, they had to attend schools that were established by religious communities. I have some dates about when women were able to be educated, but I think most people are well aware of Elizabeth Blackwell as the first physician, and she received her degree only in 1849. So the beginning of religious attending universities is a little bit later. It was only in 1870 that Cornell began to welcome women. So you understand that you need for the whole thing that was going on with establishing schools and having teachers and having women religious be those teachers, you needed this college to be established. So that's the kind of the perfect storm. So as I said, the Diocese of Covington was established in 1853 and covered more than half of the state of Kentucky. And the first bishop was Bishop Carroll, and between Bishop Carroll, Bishop Tebby, who was the second bishop, and Bishop Mays, who was the third, they began inviting religious, both brothers and sisters, to come into the diocese to provide the necessary services. So to provide education, to provide health care. The Franciscan Sisters of the Poor from over in Cincinnati established St. Elizabeth Hospital. Orphanages, the Notre Dame Sisters established orphanages, Homes for the Aged, the Carmelites. So all of these communities were invited into the diocese to provide the services that were needed for the diocese in the early days. So that's a part of the influx of religious women, but there were only 3 communities who actually came and established their central house. Like most of these, there were 30 or 40 communities, sent sisters in from their mother houses who did work and established themselves in local areas, but they didn't establish their own provinces or their own mother houses here in the diocese. So the 3 communities who ended up then in northern Kentucky were the sisters, the Benedictine Sisters, the Notre Dame Sisters, and the Sisters of Divine Providence. Each of these 3 established central houses here in the northern part of the diocese. Now that's significant in a way because the diocese really had 3 distinct areas. The Bluegrass area, the Appalachian area, the Appalachian Mountains, and then northern Kentucky. And this section of northern Kentucky was really the only part of the diocese that had any significant Catholic population. And as I said, the German Catholic ghetto. So that it was obvious then that they would establish their communities in that particular part of the diocese where there were Catholics. And there were, one of the things that most religious communities did when they came to this country was deal with the education of immigrant populations. So you're going to understand where the communities came from when you think of this as the German Catholic diocese, the German Catholic ghetto. So that's part of what's going to happen next. So the Benedictine Sisters were the first to come and establish a central house here. They came to the United States in 1852, but they only came to this section, only came to Kentucky in 1854. So they were well established by 1920 or 21 when the college started. They were well established here in the diocese. They came from Germany, the area that's called Bavaria. That was the area that they came from. So, you know, again, we're looking at kind of the immigrant population, the German immigrant population. And they came then during the time of the second bishop. Then the Notre Dame Sisters their mother house was in what was called Prussia at the time. And it was at the time of the Kulturkampf under Bismarck that they became limited, very limited in what they were allowed to do. And they saw the writing on the wall that they could indeed eventually not have a place there. And so they took the bulls by the horn, they took the bull by the horns, and they said, we got to send people somewhere else because we have to have a place that we can remain and we can function. And so they sent sisters to the United States, but they sent them to Cleveland, and they then were invited by Bishop Tebby to come to Kentucky, and they established their community here. So the Benedictines were on 12th Street in Covington, and the Notre Dames were on 5th Street in Covington. That's before people moved out to the boonies. At least they were boonies at that time. So they were in Covington, the Notre Dames and the Benedictines. There was something, the Sisters of Divine Providence came in 1889. Now, that they came from France, but they were from the very eastern section of France, and therefore they were from Alsace-Lorraine, actually. And that area often went back and forth between being in the territory of Germany and being in the territory of France. And so really the sisters that I've met when I've gone there, who are like in my age bracket, they identify much, I think, very much with the German heritage. Their languages that they spoke in their villages was more Germanic than French, and they only learned French when they started school. So you can understand, again, it's kind of a German kind of background. And also there was a movement in France, in that part of France, the little political or geographic areas that had different government, they were beginning to also try to secularize the culture and insisting that any religious community could only have one ministry, and only one religious community could operate in any given territory. So they also began to see that their existence was threatened. So you have to give credit to these women that they didn't just wait for it to happen, that they were creative and they were bold, and they didn't wait for the axe to fall. They took matters into their own hands, and they found a way to escape and to provide a place where they could continue to operate. And that happened to be ended up being this Northern Kentucky area. So, so by 1920 then, we had sisters that had come in 1859, 1784, and 1889, so they were all well established here. And they didn't just send a few sisters, they continued to send more and more and more. There were hundreds of sisters who came from these countries and were in this area. Now, they also needed a place to have their women that were coming. They sent very young women. They needed a place to be educated. So what we have here is the need, a great need, for somebody to be daring enough to go ahead and do this thing, to establish a place for women to be educated, primarily to be teachers in all of these institutions that needed teachers. And the Benedictines were the ones who did that. Now, they had a school in the building on 12th Street in Covington, a school for girls. And the thing is that they had recently bought property out in what was farmland, what's now Villa Hills. They had brought property there, and in 1922, a year after establishing the college, they moved out there. So now we have a building. We have a building. We have women who are passionate about education. We have a great need to educate women, and therefore it stands to reason that they did it. They did what needed to be done. They established Villa Madonna College in downtown Covington. And then it was in the building that had been their high school for girls, Villa Madonna Academy. So now we have the establishment of Villa Madonna College in downtown Covington. They operated it alone beginning in 1921, but actually beginning in 1928, discussions began with the 3 communities that were established here with their headquarters in this area to jointly staff this college, to share administration and instruction. And you probably don't realize it now because religious kind of all collaborate with each other, but in those days, each community had its institutions, and believe me, they did not join together and do institutions together. Everybody had theirs. Ours is ours and yours is yours. This was really, really revolutionary for 3 communities to jointly staff one institution and kind of have ownership of it. 3 communities. Now, they did divide things up. So different communities had responsibilities for different things. So the Benedictines kept the administrative functions. They provided the building, the registrar, the librarian, and at first even the president. So they had the administrative, and they also oversaw the math department. The Notre Dames did the hard sciences and the social studies. And believe me, from the beginning, this school was noted for its hard sciences. The Notre Dames are marvelous educators. So they had those areas, and my community, the CDPs, we did the English, we did the modern foreign languages, and we did the education department. So, you know, everybody had their little area. They didn't have to completely staff that. They had to see that it was taken care of. The diocesan priests took care of philosophy and theology, but there was overlap. So, for example, one of the priests taught in the physics department, but it was divided. The functions were divided, but the cooperation was marvelous, and the college really did flourish. It needed to expand. There were classes in all kinds of buildings all over downtown Covington. You had to know where you were going. Some of the classes, they just looked like residential houses. There were classes in the grade schools. There were classes in St. Mary's School. There were classes in Mother of God School. There were classes in La Salette's Academy. You were all over. You had to know where you were going. You had to know where you were going. The fire department that had been closed down became the science labs. It was all over the city, but it was a marvelous experience, really. So, so there was, as I said, a need for educating teachers, and that became the women religious. But at one point, one of the bishops, and I had written down which one, I think it was Bishop Howard, who said he thought that there should be a way for young men to get a college education. And so the Latin school, which took only boys out of the 6th grade and gave them 4 years so that they graduated 2 years early, had a program that was an extension of their high school program where boys could get a bachelor's degree. And that was called Thomas More College. It was in existence from the 1930s till 1945. In 1945, the Bishop of Covington decreed that boys should be accepted at the college because the men were returning from World War II. They had, you know, the ability to be educated on their whatever you call that, what they get when they leave the military. So in 1945, it became a co-ed school, and then Thomas More College closed, and it was just Villa Madonna College. Then I think it's interesting that it became Thomas More College later when it moved out in 1968, moved out to the out farther from the downtown area. And that pretty much covers the things that I had prepared. I have some other dates written down, like when other institutions in the area. Actually, Mount St. Joseph was established in 1920, a year earlier, but again, a religious community. And they had a high school for girls, and they could attend for 2 more years to get their other degree. And Xavier University only began accepting women into their full-time programs in 1969. Women could go for Saturday summer school or night school beginning in 1914, but they couldn't be officially full-fledged students there. That's kind of the outline.
So fascinating. I learned a lot myself, and just hearing the unique history of the collaboration of the orders. I think that is fascinating, and the perfect storm element, the need for teachers, the influx from Europe, that's all new to me. So thank you so much for sharing it.